Welcome to the Owlkids Books Picture Book Palooza panel called Fresh Faces, a chat with debut picture book creators. I'm Judy Brunzek, Director of Sales and Marketing, and I'm really happy to be your host today. Before I introduce the panelists, I would like to acknowledge that our office in Toronto is located on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also acknowledge that the land Toronto sits on is covered by Treaty 13, known as the Toronto Purchase, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississauga and Chippewa bands. As publishers of children's books and magazines, we take seriously our responsibility to educate our audiences about the history and legacy of colonialism and its impact on Indigenous peoples. We are dedicated to working toward a just and equitable future. Let me introduce our panelists and their books. Bambi Edlund lives on the Sunshine Coast of British Columbia, where she spends her time drawing, sculpting, and getting to know nearby critters. And she loves a really good peanut butter sandwich. She's an artist whose work ranges from needle felting to stop motion animation and general illustration, and who spent the last year or so immersing herself in renovating a new place of her own. How to Make a Peanut Butter Sandwich in 17 Easy Steps is Bambi's debut picture book, where she's both author and illustrator, and it's a hoot. Well, actually, it's complete nonsense and all the better for it. When a bunch of city critters, squirrels, skunks, raccoons, badgers, mice, crows, and even a donkey decide that a picnic lunch of peanut butter sandwiches would be a good idea, the fun begins. Each of the critters plays an important role in finding all the ingredients you need to make the sandwiches, including 4 red clogs and a skateboard. In a somewhat madcap but also methodical way, the ingredients are procured and the sandwiches are served by the end of the book, 17 steps later. Maggie Knaus lives in Toronto, Ontario now, although she's originally from Washington, D.C. She's had a long career as a photographer, including taking photos at the White House for the White House Historical Society, and has over the last several years also spent a lot of time painting. ELEANOR'S Moon is Maggie's debut picture book and is a lovely story that shows how a shared love of the moon connects a grandfather and a granddaughter. When Eleanor is born on the night of a harvest moon, her grandfather's vow to her that they'll always have the moon sets off a lifetime of connection through the many phases and types of moons. He teaches her all about it, and they even compete to see who can spot the moon during the daytime first. When Eleanor and her family move away, the depth of this intergenerational connection really comes into play as both grandfather and granddaughter are comforted by glances at the moon that remind them of the time when they lived close together and close to each other. Congratulations to both Bambi and Maggie on their debuts. Now, if you'll join me on the screen, I'd love to start asking you some questions. Welcome to both of you. This is pretty exciting. I'm going to start just with gushing. Let's gush a little bit. So Maggie, how does it feel to have your very first picture book published?
It's fantastic and surreal at the same time. These have been my private paintings for a long time before I even thought of approaching a publisher. And now they're going to be out there in the world. It's kind of a strange feeling and
Awesome.
very exciting.
That's awesome. And Bambi, you've illustrated a children's nonfiction book before, but this is your very first picture book. How does that feel for you?
Oh, it's so exciting. It's exciting, but also inevitable. It's something I've just always, since I was a kid, at some point, I'll make picture books, and then it feels like all of a sudden it's happened, even though it's been a long process.
Okay, that's great. Now you're both you're a combination of author and illustrator. So I'm giving you the chicken and egg question. What came first, the text or the illustrations? Bambi, I'm going to go back to you here.
It sounds like a simple question, but it's not an easy one to answer. Although for me, it's all jumbled up. When I first was talking to my editor and realized that the process is very sort of linear, the manuscript gets written and edited and then set in stone, and then you move on to the illustrations. And I don't do it that way. So I'm going to send you sketches with the text. It just all comes in one jumble for me. I can't extricate them from each other. It all sort of is one process for me.
So that must have made the editorial, the whole process of the development of the book really interesting and maybe a bit time consuming.
Yeah, I definitely spend a lot more time up front because I'm figuring out the illustrations as I go. But I think for them, then I'm able to show, okay, here's the manuscript and here's what's happening. You know, I think it comes as a bit more of a complete package to start off with. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Now, Maggie, you kind of alluded to your answer in your response to my first question, but do tell us, answer your chicken and egg story. Which came first, the text or the illustrations?
Oh, absolutely, the text. I wrote it 22 years ago, and I've sat on it this long because I didn't know really what to do with it. It was just a story for my daughter and my father. And it is a true story. They did have an incredible connection to the moon. And so a lot of the things that are in the book are true. And some of them are fantasy of what I'd always hoped I could do with my father. Like, my father never went camping in his life, but that's one of the scenes I always wanted to do with him.
Well, I can't say I blame him on the camping front myself, but anyway, never mind. Okay, well, see, because what you'd answered before, it led me to believe that the paintings came first. So that's it's good to know. So I'm going to stick with you, Maggie. Your book shows such a lovely intergenerational story, while also somewhat slyly introducing kids to things like the phases of the moon and different types of moons. There are light moments, but there are also ones of real emotional connection. And you've alluded to this. I mean, is your own family the inspiration for the story and for the whole book?
Yeah. I was very lucky, and my father was my best friend. And it's funny, it's one of those things you never count on as, well, I didn't count on as becoming a parent. I didn't realize that someone would love my child as much as I did. And he was a little obsessed with his first grandchild. And he'd come over anytime he could to just spend time with her, and a great relationship with the two of them evolved, and that's how the story was generated. So there's
lovely.
a lot of reality in it.
That's really nice. I mean, this must just make your heart grow 3 times the size it normally is, just to see the story come to fruition. And I'm sure your daughter's happy to see it too.
It's sort of a love letter to my father. So
for sure. Oh,
yeah.
That's lovely. Now, Bambi, your book is extremely different in tone. It's full of hijinks and silliness, and yet you also do show kids that there's a process to making a sandwich, including an ingredient list, explicitly showing the variety of steps that it takes to make the picnic happen at the end. What was your inspiration for the story and for the book?
Well, funny enough, mine also has a lot to do with my father, but that's more inspired by his ridiculous love of the ridiculousness. Even just that it's 17 steps, that was something that it had to be the most ridiculous number I could find. So yeah, I've just always loved a ridiculous process. When I was a kid, I loved books where you would sort of go, what? But then it would end up having a purpose. So I loved the list of the crazy things and then showing how they actually get used. But I also designed food magazines for a long time and laid out a lot of recipes. And I do think that that's probably how the recipe part snuck in. I can remember thinking, this is ridiculously complicated. It doesn't have to be this hard to make a souffle or whatever. So yeah, I think that ended up being part of the inspiration too.
That's interesting. So you pull on everything that happens to you when you create something new, for sure.
For sure. And yeah.
Now, most people say that you can't tell a book by its cover, but publishers and readers and authors, illustrators know that that's not quite true, because covers are super important to how a book is seen and perceived, and you know how pick upable it might be. So when you were working on the cover of the book, was there anything that surprised you or pleased you or ticked you off or whatever, anything? Bambi, let's go back to you.
I think the most difficult part of it for me was choosing which of all the critters would end up on front. On the cover, we didn't want to have it too complicated, something that would set the tone, but yeah, not have too many crazy things going on. So for me, really, I pretty much always land on a raccoon if that's an option. So it ended up being the raccoon eating the sandwich. So, but it was definitely a challenge figuring out what key visual could adequately represent the whole book. It was an interesting process for sure.
Well, it's also a really long title. So
Yes, yes.
So it's a lot of words to fit onto a cover as well, and to kind of make sure that they're legible, and really kind of balancing all of that out and trying to fit a sense of the absurdity of the book, and conveying that on the cover.
Right. Yeah, I didn't want to have just one character on there either, because that doesn't really reflect. I do hand lettering myself, so again, I think that's part of, I sort of see it with the text in there as well, which maybe helped, maybe didn't. But
Right.
yeah.
Okay. And Maggie, what about you in terms of the cover?
Well, I did everything backwards because I didn't know I was going to be doing it this way. I didn't know I was going to be publishing a book. So I was really painting for myself. And I originally painted the cover in my mind with an orange moon. And I also had the father doing the sign for I love you in American Sign Language. And we thought that didn't read well because not everybody would know what that sign meant. And we also thought that it might signal people in the hearing impaired world that this was a book for them. So we took out his hand gesture, and I decided, because there were so many beautiful pinks in the book, to change the color to pink. And I really, like Bambi said, you have to have sort of a key image in mind, and the moon, of course, was there, and their relationship. And I wanted to have that connection very simply done on the cover.
Nice. Yeah, it's a very so it's a great silhouette, and it really stands out as a simple but evocative image. Okay, so here's the time, because you're now so experienced with a book each, and of course it's you're waiting for it to publish this fall, but having gone through the whole experience of developing the editorial, developing developing the text, and developing the illustrations, is there a piece of or is there some advice, maybe not just a piece of advice, but just, is there any advice that you would have for authors and or illustrators, the kind of thing that if you knew 5 years ago, that it would have made a big difference to you? Maggie, I'm going to go back to you on this.
Well, yeah, because as a 59-year-old starting a second career, I would say, don't let anyone tell you you can't do it, because it works sometimes. And why not try? Life's too short.
Okay. Anything about the process, that which I think is awesome. Anything about the process itself, or just
Yeah, I would get yourself well versed in the technical aspects of creating a book, because I missed a lot of that because I didn't know. So
and
ask a lot of questions.
What do you mean by technical?
I didn't know
technical aspects?
Really basic things, like I didn't know what a bleed was. I didn't know that you had to make the image that much bigger, because that would be cropped a little bit, and make space for the words. And there were some very basic things that I just didn't think about or know to ask questions about. So, but always ask, because people are willing to help.
Yeah, that last bit is really excellent bit of advice. Bambi, what about you? What's from your perspective, what would you suggest?
I think my main advice would be, if you've got an idea that's been in your head bumping around for years, and just put it together in a book form, and because it evolves as you're making it into an actual book. It's always different in your head than it is once you start actually making it. And don't be too precious with your original idea. I think that the whole don't fall in love with your first idea is really useful in this sense, because working with an editor, someone who can throw out other ideas. And, you know, if you get, there's a bunch of things that, there's so many elements to that book, and they had all been sort of in my head for a long time churning around. But then once you actually pace it out into 32 pages and it's got to flow and be sort of readable page by page, things are going to change. So I think the sooner you can get it all out of your head and into some sort of book-like format, it will change, and you'll have better ideas than your original ones. So I would say just don't be too afraid to just dive in and make it and see what comes out the other end, because it's probably not what you're expecting going in.
So the whole sense of the collaboration of creating the book, of working with an editor, and I have to say, editors are truly unsung heroes. They are amazing, and because of their perspective and the ability to really help shape something to be probably better than the original, but done in collaboration with a sort of big picture at play there, I'd say.
Absolutely. When it's been in your head for too long, you sort of ignore potential problems, and somebody else who's coming at it from a different perspective but invested in the idea just can really open up so many more potential ideas. And it's the editing process. I just love it. It's been amazing.
Yeah, the editing and the art directing process, both of which are intense and entwined and all of that sort of thing. Is there anything else that either one of you would like to say about your book, Maggie?
I agree with what Bambi's saying. I mean, I didn't know that I would get an editor and an art designer, and this book wouldn't be what it is without them. So the editor changed the order. Jennifer was amazing, and I think it made for a much better story. And Danielle was super helpful to me in the technical aspects of things and gave me some ideas. And it was an incredible gift to work with them. But I also had a lot of fun putting Easter eggs in there for parents too. It's not just for kids. It's for anyone who loves the moon.
That's great. That's great. Bambi, anything else you'd like to add?
I think it's just been so much fun to see it come together. And I just would encourage anyone who's interested in making a book to not be afraid of the smoke and mirrors aspect of it. There is a lot to learn, like Maggie was saying, but it's learnable. And I think just jump in and ask questions, and there's lots of resources out there. It's not a terribly complicated process, even though it feels really foreign when you're first starting.
Yeah, it's not complicated. It's there's a lot of steps, but it isn't complicated. And I guess the advice that is given to all writers is read. And if you want to do picture books, go read a whole pile of picture books and observe what's going on with them. Really take them apart metaphorically, and then kind of learn through doing that as well. Okay, well, that covers our discussion for today. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and you can read and review today's books and more on Edelweiss and NetGalley by clicking through on the links on in the Owlkids books booth. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.